The webinar is on the elements on heads, which is a call to actions to address motorcycle safety in East Africa, which will be given by Sam Clark from Transaid. Before I introduce Sam, I want to talk a little bit about AfroSafe Academy. AfroSafe Academy is a network of engaged scholars and practitioners with the joint missions to advance research and education, traffic safety, with particular focus on the Africa context. Of course, AfroSafe Academy provides a platform to exchange knowledge and experience, share education materials, stimulate research and teaching collaborations. And also, AfroSafe Academy is a translation initiative without direct connection to a particular country. What we do normally in AfroSafe include networking, scientific events, organizations of scientific events such as conferences, webinars, and training courses, etc. And also facilitations of scientific publications. We promote research publication based on the African context, and educations, which include compilations of high-quality teaching materials sufficient to initiate a new update or existing university courses traffic safety. Also empowering research, make research a career attractive, and researchers' voice heard by politicians and decision makers. We are available on the social medias, including LinkedIn, and also X, which is formerly known as Twitter, and also through the emails. Some of the activities that we are doing here in AfroSafe Academy, including facilitating scientific events, networking, promotional publications, funding opportunity education, also empowering researchers for networking. And this is a journal which actually this year we expected to have a special issues on traffic safety in low-middle income countries in our journal of traffic safety research. And now it's open for submissions. You can submit your work so that it will increase visibility and to share experiences with other researchers from low-middle income countries. And we have the upcoming conference, which will be held in Ghana from 12 to 15 August 2025. Now the call is open for abstract submissions. So you can submit your abstracts and also to share your research finding and experiences in promoting the road safety. And this, which is going to focus on the elements on heads, a call to action to address motorcycle safety in East Africa. Tom, the floor is yours. Thank you. Welcome.
Not to speak much more than for about 15 or 20 minutes, just to allow time for any discussion or questions that you might have. But just to introduce myself, my name is Sam Clark. I'm the head of programs with Transaid, which is an international development NGO. And we are transport and logistics specialists. One key area of our work is road safety, and we've been working in the motorcycle safety arena for over a decade now. We've done various bits of research which were funded by formerly the FID, funded by the UK government, and we've also done various sort of projects which have looked at the potential for motorcycle taxis to perform an emergency transport role in countries such as Uganda. From my perspective, it's lovely to see that motorcycle safety is finally getting some traction. For anybody that was in Morocco in February at the Fourth Ministerial Conference, you'll have seen that actually there were quite a few sessions there trying to address the subject, which was a pleasure to see finally. But today I'm going to, with your permission, talk more about a project that we've been implementing more recently in Kenya. This is a project which is supported by the FIA Foundation. We've been implementing it. There's a 50 split between commercial motorcycles carrying freight and carrying passengers. And we've seen a massive increase in Kenya. I think as many of us have since COVID, with couriers and motorcycle taxis performing that role. You can also see from this picture that where there are passengers, none of the passengers that I can see in this picture are actually wearing helmets, and that again is indicative. It's illustrative of the reality where pillion passengers are. There is an incredibly low helmet prevalence amongst pillion passengers. I am somewhat surprised to see that pretty much 100% of the motorcycle riders or drivers are wearing helmets. That's not so illustrative of the reality. Usually we see more like 65%, particularly in Nairobi. But you can see there that right in the center, there's somebody who's not wearing their helmet correctly, and that is an all too common image. So quite an interesting sort of picture to set the scene in Kenya. And I'm going to argue that context is actually everything when we consider the solutions to motorcycle safety going forward. The project that we are implementing. So we are, whoops, let me go back to the other one. We are implementing a project which sees the establishment of what we're calling a helmet wearing coalition. We established that back in 2021. And what we've been trying to do since is to grow that coalition and to cement its place in the sector, really. It's a multi-sectoral group. It involves government agencies, civil society organizations, the private sector, and of course the rider associations and the riders' voices themselves. And really, it's just a mechanism to encourage a more collaborative approach to motorcycle safety and to start to encourage more people to work together to share resources and work more effectively going forward. So that's really the core, first and foremost objective of this particular project. The second objective is around enforcement, which I'm going to come back to in a little bit. The third objective is that there is obviously, with a mixed group such as we have in the coalition, we have over 20 organizations represented on the coalition. There's an incredible amount of expertise and insight available when you sit around the table with everybody represented on the coalition. And actually what we try to do is to try to flow money into that group for organizations to team up to implement scalable solutions to some of the key factors that we think are lacking in terms of motorcycle safety in the Kenyan context. Them being issues around enforcement, around access to affordable helmets, and also awareness amongst the riders around safety issues. So we've had an incredible amount of success actually in terms of developing these pilots and implementing them. One pilot we're particularly proud of is a partnership. We're working with 7 SACCOs, or motorcycle taxi cooperatives in Kenya. And we're using them as a vehicle to improve access to affordable helmets, which they do by sort of strengthening supply chains with the helmet suppliers, but also by providing flexible means of payment for the riders. And we've seen a massive amount of take-up from the riders themselves on those helmets, which is fantastic to see. And the fourth objective there is the regional dialogue. So we're trying to take what we're doing in Kenya to the region and beyond. And some of you might have heard that the FIA Foundation started the Safer African Helmets Initiative, which is a regional initiative which commenced and kicked off in Kigali in December last year. We are supporting that initiative with the FIA Foundation. And actually in July, we're having a follow-up conference in Nairobi as part of that initiative, and that aims to bring in not only countries and government representatives from the East African region, but throughout sub-Saharan Africa. I'm going to go back to number 2 because that's really the objective I want to focus on today as we take this discussion forward. And this is a priority which has been highlighted by members of the coalition. Obvious shortfalls in terms of enforcement capacity in Kenya, as well as helmet testing capacity. And I'll tell you a little bit more about the context and how we came to that conclusion that we should be prioritizing this particular area. So Kenya actually stands out in sub-Saharan Africa as one of very few countries that has relatively robust legislation, and more prominently is that actually it has a standard which links to the legislation. There are only 2 or 3 countries, according to the WHO, there are only 2 or 3 countries in sub-Saharan Africa which actually have legislation which links to a helmet standard. In other words, every helmet on the market below that helmet standard is in effect an illegal helmet, and it should be. Well, the suppliers, the producers of those helmets are performing an illegal act by putting it on the market. What we see, however, in Kenya is that the helmet market is massively dominated by imported substandard helmets. The vast majority are coming from outside of the country, and the vast majority are enter the market and for sale between $3 and $5. And many of the riders are opting to purchase these because they're a more affordable option, purely really for the sake of being seen to be wearing helmets on the road. However, we are still seeing quite low helmet prevalence, both for operators and even lower for pillion passengers. A recent study that we did, and this was a Nairobi-based study, it found 63% of rider operators wearing helmets, but between 10 and 12% of passengers wearing helmets. And obviously that prevalence goes down outside of Nairobi. Previous research that we did a few years ago identified between 35 and 40% in rural areas of helmet prevalence. So a big issue there. We're seeing that helmet wearing behavior is worst in riders under 35 years. So the younger you are, almost the less compliant you are with the legislation. And yet the average age of motorcycle victims is 31 years old. So right slap bang in the middle of that category. The reality on the street is that there are recognized shortfalls in terms of capacity to enforce helmet safety. This is due to competing priorities or a lack of resourcing in terms of market surveillance. There is no helmet testing laboratory in Kenya. In fact, there is only, since December, only one helmet testing laboratory in East Africa. And that one helmet testing laboratory is in Rwanda, and tests to the UN standard 2205. And yet, what we're seeing is a growing proportion of the number of road traffic fatalities linked to motorcycles. And the National Police Service in Kenya reported 35% of road fatalities in 2023 were motorcycle related. Part of that study that I mentioned earlier, we went on to do some study in terms of the health costs of motorcycle taxi. I'll provide you with a link as I close out this presentation towards the end of it. But what we did was a study in based on the hospital records of three hospitals in Nairobi County. And we took a period of 18 months, that was between May 2022 and October 2023. We identified just under 1,000 motorcycle crashes, whereby the victims from that crash were brought to hospital. So in a case where somebody dies at the scene, that person is generally not brought to hospital. So they are not part of this study, unfortunately. But what we saw of those just 9,000, sorry, that's just below 10,000, 9,996 people. We saw 56% incurred serious injuries, 24% died, and 20% incurred slight injuries. And these are the serious, the slight, and the fatalities. These are categories which are dictated by the police and the crash data that they collect at the scene of crashes. 34% of the serious injuries were injuries to the head, and head injuries. Some analysis of the cost of the treatment that each of the crash victims were receiving of all the injuries types that people were suffering from when they were brought to hospital. Head injuries were by far the highest cost of treatment to the individual, and therefore had the biggest impact on out-of-pocket expenses, and obviously household expenses as well. We found that the riders, and this is contrary to some information I've heard sort of verbally from other people, but we found that the riders were far more likely, which is an interesting finding. We saw possible peaks identified during our objective next is to establish a helmet testing lab in Kenya. Quotes reveal that the equipment needed to set up a testing lab is somewhere in the region of 275,000 US dollars. We're trying to source funding for slightly more of that, because I think as part of that procurement, it's only sort of responsible for us to actually demonstrate the impact of that equipment as well, and also build the capacity of the Kenyan Bureau of Standards, so that actually that the equipment comes in and we can hit the ground running in terms of that. So what we plan to do is to conduct research on the impact of the test lab. What we're trying to do before we bring the test in is to study which look at prevalence of sub-empowerment on the streets and in the markets. In the road safety status report, it reports something like in the region of 3,500 to 4,000 total deaths per year. So of which at the moment, sort of about 1,200 are motorcycle taxi riders. So it's a decent proportion. But as we know from the WHO report, it's likely to be a massive underrepresentation of the reality. I think, as a final note, one of the things that frustrates me most about countries like Zambia is that maybe from the rest of Africa, sort of the eyes of the rest of Africa, commercial motorcycle taxis have been slower to infiltrate and become a thing in Southern Africa. But I do think that if we don't do anything soon, we're in danger of falling into very many of the similar traps that we did in East Africa, where we missed a trick basically, and we've been playing catch up ever since. Thomas, there is one person on this call you might want to get in touch with. His name is Albert Banda. I think he's still on the call, but he's currently doing some research in Zambia as
Yes,
well.
someone's here.
So who's that?
I have a question as well to ask.
Go on, Albert.
Ye- Oh, yeah, yeah. I hope you can hear me clearly.
Yes, I can hear you.
Oh, yes, this is Albert Banda from Zambia. Um, Actually, I'm carrying out a research on bit of formalizing motorcycles as taxis. And just in December, I had an opportunity to talk to motorcycles or passengers questioners actually for my research. I've done part of the data so far. I'm yet to talk to the authorities and the rest of it. But what I noticed with regards passengers not wearing helmets, I don't know what the situation is in Kenya. Is that okay? Some passengers they don't like wearing these helmets for hygiene issues. Hygiene, they'll say the helmets are dirty, and for that reason, because you see, this is a helmet that is exchanging heads, and in most cases, our riders don't seem to take care of these helmets. So I don't know. Is there any such a thing in Kenya as being forwarded as reason for not wearing helmets? And if so, is there anything that can be done, maybe to have some additional, headgear, like maybe hairnets or so, maybe just to cushion the part of the part of hygiene. And then my second question is on the compliance issues, compliance versus safety. You will notice that in most cases, even I noticed in Chipata as well, it was Chipata and Petauke. I noticed that most of these helmets are substandard, extremely substandard, and they are attractive to the riders because of they are mostly using them for compliance reasons, just to to satisfy the police and so on, which but only compromises safety. So it all goes back to authorities like the Bureau of Standards. So how do we approach this? Because when you talk about standard issues, it is political. So any such challenges, how are you about it?
Yeah. Thanks,
I
Albert.
think those are.
Thank you, Albert, for those two questions. Good to hear your voice, by the way. I'm going to take your second question first, which was about the standard issues and the compliance with those standards. My understanding, Albert, is, and I think I'm right in thinking this, is that if there is a standard currently in Zambia, it doesn't link to the legislation, which means that actually you cannot enforce against substandard helmets until that happens. Kenya is one of only two or three countries in sub-Saharan Africa that I'm aware of that actually links the standard to the legislation. So I would say, as a first port of call, if there is a standard in Zambia, it should be reviewed, and it should be considered, if it's robust enough, it should be considered and linked to the legislation. And then enforcers have the basis to actually say, okay, this helmet is illegal, and they can take action. Whether they do or not, that's another question. But perhaps that's a conversation to be had with the Bureau of Standards. Albert, I think you know that what we're trying to do in Kenya with the Safer African Helmets Initiative, the Sub-Saharan African Initiative, is we're trying to bring Zambia to the table in July to a summit there. So actually, we can take that conversation forward. And I know you gave us some useful contacts, and we're hoping to make use of that and bring them to the table to discuss that issue going forward. From a point of view of your other question, which is around passengers and the reason why they're not wearing helmets, you're right. It's there's many issues, one of which is hygiene. Um, I must admit, our focus at the moment is not on passengers. We see riders as having a larger proportion of fatalities, a significantly larger proportion of serious injuries and fatalities at the moment. What I would say is that and this might be relevant, you'll have to tell me, but in Kenya, the law requires the rider to carry two helmets, one for him or herself, and the other for their passenger. And that's where the hygiene issue comes in Kenya, because on the few cases where the rider does actually carry two helmets and offers the passenger the helmet, the passenger usually says no on the basis of hygiene, or some aesthetic reasons have been given, hairstyles that don't allow the use of conventional helmets, that type of thing. So I don't know, maybe we need to be thinking about the type of helmets that we're using, whether they're relevant for that particular climate, whether we need to think about, there are many talks about tropical helmets which provide more sort of aeration, and perhaps less hygiene becomes less of an issue. It's a very complex problem. I don't know what the solution is, Albert, but I'm happy to take it offline and discuss with you if you'd like to.
Thank you so much.
Pleasure, Albert.
And this, we have one question regarding the quality of the element used. And what can you comment about the quality of element used based on experience in Kenya? Because always we put a lot of emphasis on the element used, but we forget about the quality. What can you comment about it?
Yeah, that's a good one. Who was that, by the way?
Gilbert.
Oh, Philbert. All right, Phil. What I would say is that I would say, at a guess, and this is a study we're trying to do at the moment to determine the prevalence of helmets on the market which are substandard, and in Kenya's case, that makes them illegal or counterfeit helmets. But at a guess, I would say upwards of 90% of the helmets on the market are substandard. And what that means is that they just don't provide the protection that they're supposed to the rider. And as I said in the presentation, Philbert, most riders are purchasing the cheapest helmets they possibly can, purely for the sake of being seen to wear the helmet, rather than as a means of protecting themselves from head injuries. So I would say a massive, I mean, come back to me in 6 months' time, and I'll give you a more sort of accurate figure on the proliferation of those types of helmets on the market. But I would say, I guess, upwards of 90% at the moment, which puts, there are currently 2.4 million registered commercial taxi riders in Kenya. So it puts every single one of those people at risk, as well as everybody that uses them. And obviously, Kenya is a gateway to the rest of to Uganda, to DRC, to South Sudan. Those helmets are coming in through Mombasa and going to those countries as well. So it's a massive issue.
Hi, Sam. This is Bright.
Hi, Bright.
Hi. I just wanted to add to what you said earlier and to the person that asked the question about the hygiene. Kenya has recognized that as an issue, and our Kenya Bureau of Standards have processed a standard for hair liners for the helmet. I think it's S2944 or something like that. So that's being worked on in recognition to the fact that most passengers are not wearing helmets because of hygiene issues. So working on the materials, what it would look like, there's something being worked on. So it's a recognition that Kenya has. Just wanted to add this as well.
Thank you for that, Bright. Really useful information. Appreciate it.
Yes.
Sam, my name is Richard Young Owere from Uganda, and I serve with the Legacy Road Safety Initiative. It's very exciting to hear you share, all these statistics and a lot of initiatives that you are putting across, through TransAid. And most of the information that you've shared regarding the challenges with these two-wheelers are way similar to what we are experiencing here in Uganda. The biggest challenge being that the motorcyclists are almost, I don't know, they are now competing with the cars, and more or less they're about to take over, and the numbers are going up. And so many initiatives have come up to try to look into how to, support in just probably regulating them and organizing them. But it's a little bit very political, because I mean, one wing comes up and then another will come, and while one body is trying to push for what you would think is going to organize the industry, another is trying to fight it. So it's a bit political, and it needs to be treated carefully, that some people are afraid, on even pushing for probably what they would feel would make sense and bring sanity back to our roads. But this is what I wanted to just to ask, but also to add. Currently in Uganda, of course, the regulations have been put in place, and the standard is also being worked on. And one of the things that the government is pushing for right now is to see to it that if you're selling a motorbike or you're registering for one, you must be having 2 helmets, one for the rider and one for the passenger. You will not be registered if you don't have 2 helmets, and you're not able to sell motorbike if you do not have 2 helmets on them. The challenge to this still remains large, that the issue is how to enforce this, and because like you said, the majority of the helmets that we have on the market are substandard, and I think it's because of affordability issues. And so just how to get rid of the substandard helmets that are on the market, and then ensure that the standard ones come in is a big challenge. Of course, there's a lot of conversation that the government is having towards the issue of trying to set up a testing lab, as you're currently doing for Kenya and something. But I think that is something that is still far to reach for us as I think as a country, because now we're just setting up, a vehicle mandatory testing centers. So now it might be a bit tricky for the government to come in with one also for the helmets and so on. But the challenge I would want to highlight here is the compliancy and the enforcement is a bit of a challenge to us. And I don't know, because you equally say even in Kenya, there is still a challenge of enforcement. I don't know what we're going to use as a benchmark to help us in enforcement. I liked what you said, ensuring that the mandatory membership to the different bodies. Now, the challenge in our side here is to find that body that probably you will say, maybe these operators also become a member to those organizations, and should they not comply, maybe they could be invoking. Yes, I know we do have right now, we have operators that are pushing for a bit more organized transportation in terms of Uber, in terms of we now have for us, then we have Safe Border. I don't know which ones are operating in Kenya, and they are trying. They are putting in trainings for these riders. They're ensuring that they have helmets and so on. But the fact still remains, these helmets are not of standard.
Yeah.
So and now for us who are focusing on empowering young people to be able to access schools safely, we are saying every child should have a helmet. Now, just a few hours ago, I was having a conversation with one of the senior road safety officers of the Ministry of Works, and I was asking him, who do we penalize in the event of a crash that involves a school-going child who is on a motorbike, and probably the child does not have a helmet, because as for our case, the regulation states that any minor that is found on a motorbike should be having an adult to support. Now, the question is, if a minor does not have a helmet and the adult has and the rider has, and there is a crash, who should be penalized? Because we wouldn't want to leave any gap, in a way so that people find opportunities to manipulate the system. So the issue of enforcement really and compliance is still a huge animal that we'll need to keep comparing notes and having conversations on, to see to it that we are able to have the right helmets in place. Yeah.
Yeah, Richard, thank you for your input. You covered a number of different subjects. I will feed back on a few of them. But Richard, first of all, I mean, I'd love it if you'd get in touch with me separately, because I don't think we've met before, but please do get in touch if you'd like to continue this conversation. But some of the key points that you mentioned, that political aspect is absolutely a big constraint to addressing motorcycle safety. We see, as you know, we see riders co-opted into supporting sort of the political campaigns of various politicians and people involved in general elections, in the lead up to these elections, which is often, there's often sort of mismessaging around safety in those sorts of periods. But also, many, as you well know, in many of the cases, the riders are not the owners of the bikes, and many of the bikes are owned by people in power with influence, and sometimes it's not in their interest to actually sort of address some of the issues that we're talking about today. And that sort of links to what you were saying about buying motorcycles and the supplier or the distributor having to give 2 helmets with every bike, which is absolutely the right thing to do. The only problem is that in many cases, the person who buys the bike is not the person who's going to ride the bike. So do those helmets get through to the rider? I'm not sure. It's a very, very difficult sort of lengthy chain to actually monitor every step of the way. I mean, when we have a similar sort of thing in Kenya, where 2 helmets are supposed to, by law, supposed to be given with every sale bike that's sold, but a big problem in terms of market surveillance and checking up on, first of all, whether the helmets are being distributed, and secondly, whether those helmets that are being distributed are to the standard. And in some cases, there is word that in some instances, substandard helmets are being distributed with bikes. For me, I think that the solution, or the most obvious solution, is to stem the flow of these poor quality helmets coming into our countries, and support local production, really. And I think you were saying about Uganda not necessarily having the capacity at the moment to think about establishing a helmet testing lab, but as I said before, most of the helmets, if they're coming in from outside of the country, they're coming in through Mombasa. So, there's scope there for Uganda and Kenya to work together, and to make sure that at the port of entry, Mombasa, those helmets are turned around and sent back to where they come from if they don't comply with, first of all, the Kenya standard, and equally, second of all, the Uganda standard. Because I know Uganda has made an incredible amount of progress over the last few years, with the Global Road Safety Program, and the coalition that you have going there as well. And the final point I just wanted to make in terms of enforcement, and you were talking about benchmarking, is I think we all sort of look to Rwanda, really, especially in East Africa, as an example when it comes to enforcement. Somehow they managed almost 100% compliance with helmet wearing. The quality of the helmets is questionable, but they do get helmets on heads, so they must be doing something right.
Hello, Sam.
Hello.
Yes, this is Toto.
Hello.
I would like to share some experience from Dar es Salaam, Tanzania. It's like hearing from the former speakers and the presentation that you did. It's like we are having the same problem. But my contribution was also on the compliance issues. I was trying to imagine it's like we are skipping a problem, because I'm not sure if we have, let's say, high quality helmet, and maybe we have managed to make them affordable, that the riders will still wear them. Because from my perspective, I think they are related to some of them. It's kind of their, I don't know whether we can say it's the behavioral issues. It's like they don't wear even if they have it on the motorbike. That's experience in Dar es Salaam, because you find some of them, they have the helmet. They can even have two of the helmets, but they don't use them. So maybe we might struggle with the quality, which is good, but I'm not sure if the compliance will be okay. And also, when we say maybe we can struggle with the enforcement, I think it's okay as how the experience from other countries, how they have explained. Sometime in our regions, enforcement depends on the season, especially when you go for the election election periods. The enforcement becomes sort of relaxed, because motorcycle taxi riders, they form a very huge part of people who are expected to vote. So you find sometime dealing with motorcycle taxi riders, it becomes very difficult, especially during election periods. So maybe from my perspective, I thought maybe we can think of behavioral change interventions. Like, is there anything that we can do to make like motorcycle taxi riders to have that internal instinct of requiring to be like safe on the road, to make sure it becomes from their heart to wear helmet, and then maybe becomes from their heart to behave safe, because apart from helmet, there are so many risky behaviors that they perform on the road. Especially in Dar es Salaam, it's very uncommon to see riders waiting for the traffic light. In most cases, they just go through red light and they just overtake randomly, improper. That means, I don't know, but when I see motorcycle taxi riders, in terms of safety issues, I see it's kind of related with behaviors, and the intervention, I think it could be related with sort of behavioral change interventions. But the issue to change their behaviors is still a very huge problem, because the interventions which are traditionally used, like the enforcement, education, they're not sustainable. Like we can have, let's say, maybe as an experience from my study, which I was doing in Dar es Salaam, I had some conversation with the traffic officers. They say we can have maybe a sort of bonanza. We call it bonanza, like you to organize a lot of motorcycle, then you give them education and everything. Like even after the bonanza, they can emphasize like, okay, don't overload, use helmet. But after the same event, you see people moving from the event while you're overloading the motorcycle. So it's sort of challenging how to deal with motorcycle taxi riders. So for me, for the helmet, it's okay to make sure the quality is good, because some of them, they do complain that they don't use the helmet, because they don't feel that much protected. And some of them, they just use it to see that they're being compliant to the law in order to avoid the traffic police. But some of them, as how I said, you find the helmet also, they're not that in good maintenance. Even the strap, maybe you might find is not working, so they just put it on the head. So for me, I thought maybe, I don't know, from other experience, I thought maybe we can figure out on how we can develop maybe a behavioral change intervention, which will bring a self-initiative for motorcycle taxi riders to behave safe. Because we know most of them, they just do risky behaviors related with some kind of financial related aspects, especially maybe they don't wait for traffic light because they need to move faster to make sure they get the next passenger L. Like, I don't know. That's the experience I'm sharing, because I'm doing kind of research to try to figure out the intervention which will be related with behavioral issues, like to create an internal pressure for someone to require by himself to behave safe on the road. That's where I'm trying to work from. So I thought maybe we can have that kind of perspective, because we can have the quality helmet, but at the same time, people, they might not use it.
Yeah, Costanzo, I mean, you raised some really important points there, and I'm not sure I know the answer, to be honest. But for me, behavioural change takes, I mean, it can take a generation. If you look at the UK back in the 1980s, we had a big issue with seatbelt wearing, first of all, drink driving, and that took almost like a generation to actually stop people from doing it. And now it's absolutely unacceptable. You do not get into a car if you've had something to drink, and no one would. Well, very few people would. For me, it has to start with sort of enforcers paying more of a priority to actual helmet safety on the ground. I just don't see any other way than that, really, to give enforcers the tools they need, and that link with the SACCOs or the cooperatives, which I think, Katondo, I think used to be a law in Tanzania, but was it was taken away. It was made non-mandatory a few years ago, which was for boda riders to be a member of of an association. It's now no longer the requirement in Tanzania. I think that was a big big mistake from a Tanzanian point of view, because I think enforcers need all the help they can get, really. So I don't know. My focusing our focus in Kenya is to get as many of the substandard helmets off the market as we possibly can, and then to look at ways of keeping standard helmets affordable and employing sort of flexible payment methods and so forth, so that people aren't put off by, or well, don't have a challenge buying them. What I said in the presentation was that the substandard helmets are currently going for between $3 and $5. What I didn't say was that you can fabricate Kenyan standard helmets for between $9 and $10. So for me, that's still within the realms of affordability, as long as I can pay, lipa pole pole, sort of, little by little, until I get the helmet. But yeah, I don't know what the solution is in that from a behavioral change point of view, Katundo. We're trying to do some media campaigns at the moment, which change the narrative around Buddha riders, which is they're portrayed very negatively by the government, by the press. We're trying to change that a little bit so that people warm to them a little bit more and actually want to sort of invest in their safety. But also we've got to consider the fact that they are a small part of a wider road ecosystem, and many of the crashes are not their fault, and many of the injuries that they feel are not their fault. It's other drivers on the road that are to blame in many cases. So I don't know. It's a really complex issue.
Oh, thank you, thank you, Sam, for nice presentation. And I think that our time is over. Then we'll try to organize another webinar that will focus on the behavioral change. As we'll try to find out someone who will present him another webinar on the behavioral change, particularly among the motorcyclists. Thank you everyone for attending. We'll post the video. We'll post the recorded video on the website. Someone can refer. Thank you.